Hey people, Struggle Walker. So I'm getting started on a brand new project, something that I've wanted to do for a little while now. I'm going to build a brand new terrarium using this BioBubble. BioBubble or WonderBubble, I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be. It seems kind of overpriced, it doesn't really seem to be for sale too much anymore. It was probably around $60 retail. I managed to pick it up off Facebook Marketplace for like $10, something ridiculous. So it has a couple different levels. It's like modular. Mine came with this little extension piece, and it's cool. Some people use it for apparently hamsters. I guess you can get like a little hamster condo version of this. But it's got these cool little plexiglass bubbles. It has a neat effect. I want to set this up and do something cool with it. I want to use the bottom section for water, since that's waterproof. And then I want to have like a terrarium kind of plant level up top. So the plants that I plan on focusing are cephalotus, or the Australian pitcher plant. It's a more expensive and less commonly seen carnivorous plant. Usually you can pay around $60 for a mature specimen, or if it's an unusual variety, as much as like $100. So I want to get into growing this plant, and when you have plants that are more delicate, like the Australian pitcher plant is, you want to put it in a terrarium, because a terrarium allows you to control factors better. In this room, I get a lot of AC, so that kind of dries out the air a lot. So putting plants in terrariums helps keep their environment more humid. It also makes it more robust. So if I go away for a weekend, I don't have to worry about coming back and seeing that the plant's all dried up, because the bubble will kind of contain the moisture and let it be more autonomous. And by including a water portion in this, it's going to add like an extra reservoir. So I'm really excited about it. We're going to see what we can do. Now the terrarium's all set up, we have a better idea of what we're working with. So we've got a lot of vertical space, so we're going to try to make the most out of that. I grabbed a piece of paper and began sketching my rough ideas for what I want this terrarium to look like. I want a light bulb to be situated in the top so that I don't have as much obstructing the view and everything is contained as possible. I'm going to have water in the bottom third, probably have some fish or invertebrates, maybe shrimp or crabs in there. The main body of the terrarium is going to be mountain coming out of the bottom of the terrarium. It'll have shelves and ledges and cliffs. Australian pitcher plants like to grow on mountainsides, so this will come pretty naturally to them. I'm going to be experimenting with a kind of wicking technology for this terrarium. I'll have 3 PVC pipes that are set down inside the water, and they'll wick water up into the substrate in the main body of the terrarium. I'm going to have the rock kind of recede from about a third of the terrarium and have that area open for water. Now that I have a rough idea, I'm going to get started with my supplies. I bought a bag of lava rock from a landscaping supply. I'm using this because it's chemically inert, it's lightweight, and it's got a lot of air cavities that'll let it work well with hot glue. First thing I do is I start sorting out all that I like the most. Pieces that are larger or flatter or have an interesting texture on them. Now that my rocks are all selected, I'm going to wash them off and get them ready for being put into the terrarium. If I just put them in as is, all that red dust and rock silt that you see is going to cloud up the water. It's also not going to help with hot gluing the rocks together. So I'm just going to rinse and dump the water out until it runs clear. This is also a lot more efficient if you use 2 hands. Now I'm getting to work cutting those PVC pipes that I'm using to wick the water up. I have a rough idea of how deep they need to be, and I'm going to make about 3 of them. Now that the pipes are cut, I need a filter on the end cap so that the substrate doesn't wash right down into the water. For this purpose, I'm using some landscaping fabric. It lets water go through, and it's not going to interfere with the plants at all. Once I've figured out the rough size, I'm going to cut it, being careful not to cut directly towards myself. Now that it's cut to the right length, I'm going to use some zip ties to fasten it. My zip ties aren't long enough to go all the way around, so I'm using a little trick where you daisy chain one into the other. Once they're nice and snug, I use the little wire trimming function on my Gerber to snip the ends off. Now that they're all capped, I arrange them in the bottom of the substrate using the rocks to hold them steady. Well, hopefully hold them steady. Oh, still having issues. There we go. Now I just backfill it up until they're pretty much buried underneath all those rocks. I'm leaving the front area open because that's going to be my water viewing area. Now I need to figure out how much of the landscaping fabric I need for the base of the terrarium, essentially. After my very precise measurements, I cut out the fabric I need. Yep, this looks like about right. And since I need those pipes to come through the fabric, I'm cutting some slits and pulling them open so that I can push the pipes through. At this point, I'm still not exactly sure how the landscaping fabric is going to kind of weave into the whole design of the tank. I'm putting some rocks down just to hold it in place. And at this point, I'm thinking I'm just going to have the fabric just kind of merge in with the rocks. This turns out not to be my long-term design. Now that I've got the rocks roughly arranged, I'm going to mix up my substrate. I'm using a 50-50 mixture of dried peat moss and sand. The thing with working with peat moss is, if it's dry, it's really hard to get it wet. So you really need to knead it kind of like bread. Just mix it up, break up the clumps. Some people boil it. I prefer just to use manual mixing. Once that looks good, I'm taking out my sand, which is some black aquarium sand, and I'm pouring it roughly 50%. I ended up putting a little bit more sand than I wanted in there, but it'll still work. Now I'm taking my rocks that I'm going to use for the main landscaping portion, and I'm laying them out to dry. A heat gun speeds up the process. I don't want my rocks to have any moisture on them because that'll interfere with getting them to stick together with the hot glue. Now I take my substrate and begin packing it down into the water wicking tubes. The substrate needs to reach down to the water level for it to work. After I do this, I need to start packing in the substrate around the structure. At this point, I realize that I don't have the landscaping fabric set up quite the way I want it. I don't want the substrate to just slide right into the water and cloud it up. All that peat moss is going to interfere with the water clarity if it gets in there. So I settled with this idea for kind of a rock retaining wall that holds up a wall of landscaping fabric to kind of keep everything contained. But the rocks end up being pretty loose, so I'm using a hot glue gun to hold them in place. Anybody who's used rocks in a terrarium knows that throughout the course of action in everything you do in a terrarium, moving plants around or feeding creatures, the rocks tend to get messed up and knocked around. So it's a good idea to secure them. What I don't like about using hot glue is you get these nasty little strings of glue everywhere. I also don't like how you can get globs of glue that tend to show up all over the place. So what I'm doing is falling into a methodology where I figure out where the rock is going to go, and then I figure out the points of contact for it, and then I draw a fine bead of glue and put the rock in place and hold it till the glue sets. It takes a couple seconds. It's coming along nicely. I'm doing my best to keep the globs of glue out of view. I've got some stringers, but those are pretty easy to clean up. I just like to take care of that as I go so it doesn't build up. Yep, time to clean all that gunk up. For some hard to reach areas, a pair of tweezers goes a long way. I've also made a nice rock ledge. This provides some kind of shadow and overhang for the water portion if I have a fish or some invertebrates that want to get out of the sun. And that'll also provide me an extra platform to grow some plants on. But this also means I need another piece of landscaping fabric. So once again I figure out how much I need and then I cut it down to size. Now I just need to tuck it away into place. Now secure it with a hot glue gun. The hot glue actually does a good job of melting right into the fabric, fusing it directly to the rock. And now I cut away the excess. Some time has gone by. I've taken a lot of the substrate and built up a mound in the center, which is going to kind of provide a lot of the moisture that we're wicking up from the water level. I then took a bunch of the large rocks, stacked them around the mound, and glued them into place. Since I can't just have a straight pillar of dirt that the plants are growing out of, I'm using the rocks as kind of like a retaining wall to hold on to a surface of dirt and keep it into place so it doesn't just wash down the hill. It almost ends up being kind of a stair-step design. By now I've gotten pretty good at this whole rock gluing thing. Here you can see a better view of what I'm doing. I'm kind of just feeling it out. I have a basic idea in my head of what I want this to look like. I'm trying different rocks to see how they look and see how closely they fit. I'm also looking for rocks that kind of match the color. I want to keep some of the lighter colored rocks together and then the darker red rocks together. Here I'm going for another of those kind of stair-step ledges. I want a nice gentle slope for the plants to grow out of. Sometimes I have to try different rocks a couple times before I figure out one that works. Once I've got a nice structure built up, I just need to backfill it with dirt. Again, I'm doing this carefully because I don't want a lot of dirt to fall down into the water section. I want to keep that area as clear as possible. I'm taking care to fill in as many of those nooks and crannies as possible. Well, there we go. That's looking pretty good. I've got a few more steps to do, so stay tuned for the next episode.